What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit that like button and let me know what you think of today's discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living under a rock and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another sit down video. Also, if you're on TikTok and you haven't, make sure you check out the freight train that the sit down is on TikTok. We are nearing 210,000 followers. We cover past and present crime on a daily basis. Make sure you go check us out right now. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get in to another very interesting organized crime topic. And over the last year or two, very few have had bigger names on YouTube than Skinny Joey Merlino, the man who at one point the federal government led the American Mafia in Philadelphia. There are recent reports, though, that suggest that Merlino is no longer a recognized member of the mob. He is, quote, shelved. We'll get into that. Is it true? Let's delve into the man they say now runs the Philadelphia crime family, a longtime friend of Joey Merlino. The story of George Borgesi, the alleged new boss of the Philadelphia crime family. The story next on the sit down. George Borgesi was born on August 15th, 1963 in Philadelphia. He would grow up in South Philly. His mother, Manuela Manny Borgesi, is the sister of longtime Philadelphia mobster Joseph Uncle Joe Gambi. We know the power and the respected individual that Joseph Gambi is. In my estimation, when it comes to notable people in South Philly, people that can get things done, people that get people jobs, people that help people, and guys that are likely involved in organized crime, very few are respected more than Joseph Gambi. And when you look at George Borgesi in his kind of run up to becoming a mobster, his involvement now, we see that throughout the turbulent times of Philadelphia, we first saw Joe Gambi take over and bring calm to an otherwise kind of crazy family. Is Borgesi doing the same thing? We can kind of see that throughout his life, he's always been kind of a pragmatist, if you will, goes through the levels of respect, and a lot of people respect George Borgesi. Now, what we know, George Borgesi has a brother called Anthony. Here they can be seen in much younger years. It's been no secret Anthony Borgesi has likely followed his brother and uncle into the mob. Now, George Borgesi was arrested by Philadelphia police in 1987 when he was approximately 24 years old, alongside his uncle, Philip Gambi, who was Joe Gambi's brother. According to the Philadelphia PD arrest complaint, he was arrested, Borgesi, for bookmaking and conspiracy. He would down the road plead guilty, and as far as I know, avoid jail time outside of county prison. He never went upstate. Now, one of the men that Borgesi would meet, obviously, in his younger years is Skinny Joey Merlino. We know the fact that Joey, in the 80s, alongside other young guns, a lot of these guys were the nephews, the sons of old school Philly mobsters, guys like Chucky Merlino, Joe Gambi. All of those guys were involved in the Scarfo regime, the Bruno regime. It's no secret that a lot of the younger sons of these people followed into the lives of their fathers. I've always talked about a lot of these people's lives have been decided for them. In South Philly, it's such a small area. Everybody knows everybody. A lot of people are related to each other, right? And a lot of people view South Philly just like you would view a Howard Beach or a Bensonhurst. Where we live, meaning the people that live there, being a bookmaker, being a loan shark, being a, whatever, that's like being a dentist or being a trash guy. It's just a normal thing. But generally you follow who you know into the life. And Borgesi, Merlino, a lot of the people involved, Gate and Luchabelle, a lot of these guys followed their family into the life. Now, another person that Mr. Borgesi would meet in his 20s was this individual, a person called Louis Monacello. And Louis Monacello was, for all intents and purposes, a close associate of Mr. Borgesi. Now, down the road, Borgesi would surely distance himself from Monacello because Monacello would become a complete scumbag, at least in the eyes of Borgesi. Now, as far as we know, once Merlino takes over the family alongside Ralph Natali in the early 90s, that's likely when George Borgesi was made into the family. And according to Ralph Natali, which we know Ralph Natali is not believable really at any level, he claims that Natali claims that he made Borgesi and put him as a captain. We can venture to believe, though, that it wasn't Natali that did that. It was likely Merlino elevating his friend. Borgesi has always had a connection to Delaware County, South Jersey, and he's always been a respected guy in the Merlino faction. So it's likely that around that time he was made a captain. Now, Louis Monacello would also claim that in the 90s he was his captain. Now, Monacello is also not a guy that's generally believable, and I'll prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. That said, Monacello was in the streets. He did have the respect of guys. We've seen him in footage with people like Joseph Gambi. So he definitely was respected. He was not a made guy. He was an associate. And we'll kind of venture into what Louis Monacello claims. The one thing about Borgesi, like a lot of people in South Philadelphia, he was always involved in gambling, most notably bookmaking. And obviously the caveat that goes along with bookmaking is loan sharking. If you're a bookmaker, somebody has to pay you a debt and they can't pay it. You give them a loan, you charge them interest, and it's just kind of free money. So a lot of people that are in organized crime or connected to organized crime, as we know, involved with bookmaking. Now, Monacello claims that during his time of knowing Borgesi, both in the 80s and 90s, he would claim that at one point, Borgesi claimed he was involved with up to 10 hits. Now, again, this is what Monacello claims. He is not generally believable. Now, he also kind of made people want to believe that Borgesi was this really lethal individual and you would never want to get on his bad side, and that he essentially told Monacello what to do, and Monacello just did it. That said, as we know, in the late 90s, Joey Merlino, George Borgesi, Marty Angelina, a lot of the Merlino faction were indicted by the federal government. And that would happen in 1999. Now, for Borgesi, he was indicted just like everybody else and faced racketeering charges, bookmaking, all that sort of thing. Now, around this time, the federal government alleged that George Borgesi was the number 3 in the Merlino organization, and that Merlino was the boss and really essentially running things, and Borgesi had a kind of say in what went on as being close to Joey Merlino. In the end, I'm not going to go through the trial that Merlino and everybody was involved with. We've kind of already know that. That said, George Borgesi would be found guilty of racketeering, and like Merlino, was given 14 years in federal prison. So all those guys are taken off the street. We then see kind of a calm 10 or so years in the Philly Mafia. It's alleged that Borgesi's uncle, Joseph Gambi, assumes control. And what we now see is Joe Gambi brings not only stability over the family, quietness over the family, also, though, money and connections. We know he was at a meeting in North Jersey alongside members of the Gambino family. The Philly family faction in Newark, New Jersey was moving around doing things. And it was one of the strongest times the Philly mob had really since the 80s. They were recognized by New York again. One thing that we know under Merlino, they weren't. We have heard that from various people, including people connected to John Gotti, that under Joey Merlino, the Philadelphia crime family was not recognized. In fact, Merlino was not recognized during Merlino's reign. Now, eventually, once Gambi takes over, we start seeing more and more connection between families in New York. Now, Borgesi heads off to prison and, for the most part, is quiet. In fact, according to Borgesi, his mother would say that he was almost a model inmate of sorts. He brokered peace deals between warring gangs and groups inside prison, and he pretty much kept his mouth shut. Now, what we find, like most families connected to the mafia, I want to make this clear. For people like George Borgesi's mother, we obviously feel bad for her, right? I mean, she has had to live a life with what you live as a family member of these people. You have to kind of have a balancing act. Your kids, your family members are involved in this thing, and you defend them. And we have no reason to think she shouldn't defend them. Those are her family members. This is her son. This is her uncle or brother. Now, Manny Borgesi would claim a lot of things about her son, George. She would claim that the government has had essentially a 50-year vendetta against not only her brother, but her son. Borghesi's brother, Anthony, would recall, quote, "We've always kept our mouth shut, but enough's enough. It's a personal thing." And that the government's attempt to bring in his brother was, quote, "a witch hunt. We want someone to fight for my brother's rights. His civil rights are being violated, and no one will step up to him for him." So, according to the Borghesi family, that during George's prison time in the 2000s and into the 2010s, the government was constantly kind of, trying to push charges on him or bring charges on him. And that's likely the fact that he was connected to Jerry Merlino. We know that Jerry Merlino has obviously had trouble in prison with the government going after him, trying to indict him, putting him in with terrorists, things like that. They want to try to bend these people. Now, according to the Borghesi family, they would contend that during Borghesi's prison time that Anthony Borghesi would say his brother's been in prison and he's constantly under 24-hour surveillance, and that the government has done things in terms of investigative malfeasance, i.e. protecting protected witnesses against a laundry list of criminal charges ranging from robbery to domestic violence, in which, they would cooperate against Borghesi. Borghesi's family would also contend that at one point they did petty things like driving south to federal prison with cheesesteaks and pretzels to where Borghesi was housed, and they would allow Borghesi to, quote, "see and smell them, but not taste them." So the Borghesi family's contending that, they were constantly trying to get at their son. They were violating his rights, kind of messing with him at all levels. And what they do is, in turn, Borghesi is about to complete his sentence in 2011, and they involve him in a federal indictment involving his uncle and various members and associates of the Foley crime family. And what they state is they finally got another case, and they're going to put George Borghesi away for a longer period of time. And this is the continued vendetta the Borghesi family contends they have against George. Now, they claim that in this indictment, George Borghesi from prison was still running loan sharking and bookmaking rackets, and that Bent Finger Lou Monacello, seen on the right, was his man on the street, and that Monacello's man was the guy on the left, Frankie the Fixer DiGiacomo. Now, Borghesi's family contend that how could he do all this stuff when the government has him under 24-hour surveillance, and that if you're saying that George Borghesi did all these things from jail, shame on the government, Anthony Borghesi would say, because they're supposed to be watching him around the clock. Now, George Borghesi recently, in a letter, according to the Daily News in the 2010s, via phone conversation, would tell a Daily News reporter about the case, quote, "It's a joke. I'm still sitting here," he said, from the Federal Detention Center at 7th and Arch. They contend that this never happened. In fact, Monacello was doing his own dirt on the street and using Borghesi's name to curry favor, and that he did nothing wrong here. Now, DiGiacomo and Monacello would later contend, after they flipped, that they were doing all this and all the money flowed up to George Borghesi in prison. Now, we have seen footage, from the federal government of Monacello meeting with people like Joseph Gambi, meeting with people like Anthony Stano, one of his people. So we do know that he was doing things in the street, but the government is trying to contend that Borghesi was the final guy in getting most of the money that Monacello was making, and that Monacello was hurting people in the streets. He was doing things he wasn't supposed to for George Borghesi. Now, what Monacello was also attempting to do, according to a state investigation, was make inroads into places like Delaware County and other areas like that, where they were doing bookmaking and loan sharking. Now, DiGiacomo would essentially cooperate against Monacello and Borgesi. At one point, DiGiacomo would claim that after Borgesi went to prison, Monacello told him, quote, "This is my crew. I'm the boss." Now, DiGiacomo would also recount a story first told by Monacello about an assault on a loan shark customer who failed to pay nearly $5,000. Now, DiGiacomo, like Monacello, said the victim was, quote, lured to a meeting in Manayunk, a neighborhood in Philadelphia, and brutally assaulted by Monacello. DiGiacomo would state, quote, "He thought he was a tough guy. When we left, he wasn't. The next day, he paid." So DiGiacomo outlines the brazenness of Louis Monacello and, in turn, claimed that Monacello said, "This is my crew. I'm doing all this stuff. I'm going to be what I am." And again, all the money flows up to, guess who? George Borgesi. Now, George Borgesi's attorney, in the end, when Monacello would get on the stand, tried to paint Monacello as a liar who had major financial problems and that he was a drunk. In fact, those would be strengthened due to the fact that Monacello at one point would claim bankruptcy and owed a ton of money on various businesses he had, including a bar at 10th and Wolf called Gavone's. Now, Gavone's is actually still there on 10th and Wolf. I believe the signage is still even up. I haven't been in that neighborhood for a while, but for many years it was back in the early 2010s and into like 2015. Now, the lawyers for George Borgesi would also contend that Benfinger Lou Monacello, when asked if he liked Joe Legambi and George Borgesi, he would, quote, say no, that he didn't, and that essentially he was just cutting deals to get back at Legambi and say things about Borgesi that wasn't true. In the end, and this is important, nobody believed Monacello. George Borgesi was acquitted of essentially every charge, and no one believed Monacello. And this is the ploy that the government does do. They throw up people like Lou Monacello, who, as we know, was not believable at all. And we really can't believe much of anything he says. Now, I always try to look at these things from a middle standpoint. I don't know George Borgesi. I've seen him around. I know who he is. I don't know him. I've never met him. I lived in a neighborhood. I've never seen him. He was in jail when I was there. I don't know Benfinger Lou. My thought, though, is, look, a lot of these guys, like Joey Merlino, a lot of these people, they just contend that everything's a big vendetta against them. They've never done anything wrong. Now, we do know that a jury of George Borgesi's peers have found him to be a racketeer and a convicted mobster. Do I think he was doing these things behind prison walls? I don't know. I think it'd be very difficult due to the vendetta that the government had, and they were always watching him. That said, in a court of law for a second time, unlike the first time, he was, acquitted. So, by the way, my shirt is very, very wrinkled today. My apologies. That's beside the point. That said, Borgesi would report home in 2014. And really over the last 10 years, he's been pretty quiet. He lives in South Jersey. And like Monacello, they both live in South Jersey. Lou Monacello lives fairly in the open. I found him. I sent him an email. He's fairly easy to find. If Monacello would like to speak to me, I'm here if he wants to talk. We'll have to wade through some of the things that I either believe or don't believe about him. That said, Monacello has lived in the open. We have seen Borgesi popping up in government surveillance outside social clubs. We've seen him at a real estate office that he allegedly had in the area of Passyunk Avenue in South Philadelphia. We've also seen him in the contact of a longtime friend of his, the individual on the left, a man called Stephen Sharkey. Now, Sharkey is a guy who was indicted alongside Borgesi in 1999. In fact, Sharkey recently did several years in prison in a real estate scam that, if you read into the indictment and some of the things that went on, several of the people involved, including Sharkey and a person called Antonio Ambrosio, defrauded Ambrosio's own brother-in-law out of $208,000. And after receiving the money, Sharkey immediately cut checks to a company called ARMM Investments, a company that is owned by George Borgesi. So now Borgesi wasn't named in this. That said, he may have collected some sort of windfall from a scam involving Sharkey. That said, I want to kind of venture to 2024 and various people saying that George Borgesi is now the de facto head of the Philadelphia crime family. The truth of the matter is, do I believe some of the stuff coming out by Scott Bernstein and George Anastasia? Maybe. Do I think it's far-fetched? Probably. I think what it also is showing us is that the Philadelphia crime family is very weak at this point, and they're resorting to going to other families and saying, where are we in all this? Get us back in your good graces. And I think if I do believe anything, my thought is George Borgesi likely views himself a lot like his uncle, a pragmatist who wants to be cool with everybody, wants to make money, not headlines, and wants to wage connections with other families, get back in the good graces. We have heard, according to Capisci, that the Philadelphia crime family is attempting joint ventures with the Gambino crime family. Do I believe that people that are at the head of the Gambino crime family have told Borgesi that we won't recognize you unless you do away with Merlino and publicly shelve him? Possibly. I think in terms of Borgesi, he probably looks at it, if he's still involved with the mafia, that if I'm going to do this, we want to make money doing it. We're not going to do this for nothing. The good thing for Borgesi and all of the people involved with the Philly crime family is most of the charges that could be brought against them are all very weak. So let's say they are involved with bookmaker and loan sharking. Who really cares? Again, I don't believe it is a point of emphasis with the Philadelphia FBI at this point. I just don't. And with Merlino possibly not in the picture, the thought is I would think that the FBI is on to other things at this point. Why keep making these popcorn headline cases? The only way the group here is ever going to be brought down is if you get someone to flip over some of these murders. And even then, you got to convict them. So I think people like Borgesi are recognizing, stay out of the line of fire, make money, not headlines, no violence, no drugs. You maybe take a 5-piece at some points over something, and you do what you have to do. Would I say that I think he's the boss? Possibly. Who knows? He would be a good decision or choice if you pick him. He has been very quiet in his life. He is respected. And like his uncle, Joe, he has been well respected over the years. So we'll see. I think it could mean more stability for the Philly crime family. It could be more money. I guess we'll have to just wait and see. Could get interesting. It could not. But as always, that's the 2024 mob in Philadelphia. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think of it in the comments below. If you'd like to support our channel, feel free to hit that super thanks icon below the video. We'll see you next week here on the Sit Down.